Hello and welcome to my channel. This video is about the top 5 books that are worth your time, according to me, of course. So on the 5th position we have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It is a modern American classic, winner of the Pulitzer Prize in 1961, and which is to this day still relevant in many ways. It tackles universal themes such as standing up for what's right and social equality and prejudice in America. The novel is set in the South, the perfect place to speak about racism at that time. It is about a black man named Tom Robinson standing on trial for a crime that he did not commit, and his lawyer, Atticus Finch, who decided to defend the accused regardless of all the inconveniences that he will face for standing up for the black minority. The storyline jumps from depicting the trial to the ordinary lives of the lawyer's little children, Jim and Scout. It is told from the children's perspective, which gives us a fresh and innocent look at themes of the novel. The most interesting aspect of this book, I would say, is how these children come to be acquainted with the racist indignity of their community as a result of their father's involvement in Tom Robinson's case. Harper Lee was absolutely creative in presenting deep, meaningful, and thought-provoking themes through a child's lens. Most of the scenes are apparently simple, ordinary, like an eventless afternoon spent at a southern house. But at the same time, these scenes are imbued with heavy messages and smoothly expose a social reality deeply in need of reform. One of the themes that are universal and that can also stand the test of time is swimming against the current and doing what's right no matter the cost, which is a lesson that is passed down to the children from their father, the lawyer. Harper Lee says that the one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is one's conscience, and that's pretty much the crux of the novel. This novel isn't too long, and yet it is an interesting and entertaining read that I recommend to everyone. On the 4th position we have the one and only famous 1984 by George Orwell, maybe the most famous dystopian novel, which is an absolute must-read. It's George Orwell's masterpiece that has later become the inspiration for many novels and movies tackling the same issues. This novel is a success in every category, in terms of language, storyline, themes, and even humor, despite its overall grim atmosphere. The themes are mass surveillance, power, and truth. It was written during and immediately after World War II, when Stalin was on the rise. Orwell was strongly opposed to communism and its totalitarian tendencies, and this could be felt throughout the novel. And although this novel is history-specific, its reach is timeless and its messages universal. The protagonist is called Winston Smith, who works in the Ministry of Truth. His task consists in forging or coming up with the truth that is approved by the party in charge or the government, and destroying facts that do not serve the party's interests. As a reader, you will not only be fascinated by the oppressive world that Orwell builds for his character and the deviant political ways in keeping the masses under control, but you will mostly be fascinated by the protagonist's personal crisis and struggle in adapting to his politically hostile surroundings and his ultimate rebellion. Winston Smith lives in a world absolutely contrary to reason, where war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. This novel calls for rebellion and nonconformity to everything that opposes individual freedom in general, and to political brainwashing in particular. One of the things that I enjoyed the most about this novel is the smooth unfolding of events and how it ties up to the protagonist's gradual rise to rebellion and his ultimate desire to own his own life instead of forfeiting it to the government's unreasonable ideals. This novel is absolutely worth the time you put in reading it and deserves to be reread again and again. Our top 3 is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which is yet another American classic set in the pre-civil rights era. It depicts a prejudiced South and a North that feigns being inclusive of blacks but ends up exploiting and marginalizing them. It is a first-person narration told by a character whose name we don't know. The namelessness of the character reveals the central theme of the novel, which is black invisibility in America. It is a coming-of-age novel in which the protagonist is slowly made aware of his place in society. First, as a student, he encounters bumps on the road caused by both blacks and whites in power. And then, after he displays amazing public speaking skills, he is recruited by an organization called the Brotherhood, which furthers his alienation from his own identity and his society. The novel's special style in presenting a protagonist who starts off as a clueless character then slowly grows into maturity is what makes this novel so interesting and so captivating. As a reader, you can trace this slow maturation from the different scenes and events that happen both to the protagonist and through him. He is increasingly disillusioned by his environment and has to say goodbye to some personal dreams and goals. He realizes the small of the scopeness of success for him as a black individual in racist America at that time. All his attempts at success are rather thwarted by either people who are openly racist and prejudiced, or by people and organizations who pretend to be on the side of minorities, but whose true intentions and agendas are revealed later in the book. The protagonist's slow growth and realization of how limited he is in his society is heartbreaking. It is humoristic in many occasions, but utterly heartbreaking. This is one of the very few novels that successfully moved me both emotionally and intellectually. And although the novel is fraught with tension between the races, between who's in power and who's marginalized, who's the victimizer and who's the victim, it is also made enjoyable through the use of humor. I will not be sharing the exact scenes where it was hard for me not to laugh because I don't want to spoil it for you. The beauty of this novel is actually that you get to experience every situation from the intimate perspective of the character himself. You get to grow with him. You get to be disillusioned with him. You get to feel his disappointments, his fears, his revolt, and his ultimate resolution at the end of the novel. This novel may be a little long, but every page is absolutely worth it. For our top two, we have Toni Morrison's Beloved. This is a novel that tells you, after you finish reading it, now you know what slavery was really like. Slavery is such a word that we hear too often. We know the events, we can place them in a calendar. We know what happened, but we know it from a distance, from a safe distance. To really know it up close and in its unvarnished, untamed truth, we have to go through this novel first. Beloved is set after the Civil War, in the period of Reconstruction, where Black people experienced all kinds of violence and disruption during this difficult time of transition. It is a novel mostly about the past and its tyrannical grip on the present. It opens the space for so many voices and characters, but the central one remains that of Setha, a woman in her 30s living in an Ohio farmhouse after having escaped from her slaveholder called schoolteacher. She lives with her daughter Denver and her mother-in-law baby Suggs. It is hard to discuss the genius of this novel without giving away the plot, but this much I will say. It is your atypical, gripping, and yet absolutely real ghost story. The farmhouse is harboring the sad and angry ghost of Setha's daughter, who was unfairly murdered at the age of 2. The whole novel is centered upon what the appearance of this ghost from the past is trying to convey to the main character, who is still grappling with painful memories from the past. This is a story that does not shy away from going into graphic and psychological details while picturing the reality of living in slavery. Although the writer Toni Morrison is famous for writing about the plight of racism and slavery, she is careful not to depict every white character as purely evil, a balance that is hard to reach, especially when the novel is about a story as raw as that of Beloved. Something also must be said about the lyricism and realness of the language and its ability to carry out a heavy story so gracefully. But words won't do this novel justice, honestly. It is at the head of my list because of so many other reasons, but especially because it is not a novel that changes your perception alone, but a novel that changes you, essentially. It is a novel about healing from painful memories and about what it takes to finally put your ghosts to rest. It is about opening a door in time and stepping into history to uncover the cadavers of Black people and to witness the scenes of their death and to capture the moment of their insanity. This novel will increase your reverence of the past while at the same time serving as a demystification tool that will show you the facts. Finally, it is worth mentioning that the novel's plot is inspired by the true story of Margaret Garner. If you don't want lost spoilers, don't Google the name until you read the whole. And for our top 1 book that I recommend everybody to read is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And it is arguably one of the most important works by this writer. It is a Russian literary crime novel that captures the psychology of the murderer from the moment he decides to commit the crime until the aftermath of the act. The protagonist is a poor law student called Raskolnikov, a complex character that inspires both the reader's judgment and empathy. He is first depicted as someone with large dreams but with very small means of realizing them. He develops this theory that social rules should not apply to people with a great destiny ahead of them, and that important and great people are exempt from morality. This theory, it is later revealed, is nothing but a rationalization in order to strengthen his resolve to murder a woman in order to steal her money. He starts finding faults with the victim, faults that according to his rationalizations are a good reason to kill this woman. In fact, the novel is centered upon the aftermath of the crime, that's to say that the focus is on the effects that this much rationalized act has on Raskolnikov. If you have not yet read Crime and Punishment, then you have not yet met the epitome of the turmoil of consciousness, self-doubt, and the price that must be paid for following the false prophecies of the ego. The rest of the novel, and its biggest part actually, depicts the character's slow descent into a tortured version of himself. His slow realization of the reality of his act when all illusions start falling apart drives Raskolnikov almost to mental bankruptcy. This is also the novel that Jordan Peterson hails as the door to an in-depth understanding of human psychology. As the protagonist suffers from his past act, both physically and mentally, and as he tries to escape a very intuitive and smart detective, the reader holds their breath and is completely absorbed by the fatality, the difficultness, and the beauty of the human conscience. This novel is also a window overlooking the trajectory of truth and how humans themselves deliberately obscure it in order to serve a seemingly pressing interest. The hard lesson that Raskolnikov learns as he is entirely reshaped by his act is also felt by the reader, because it does not take a murder to identify with the character as real as him. Ambition, social status, and the tendency to think of oneself as more worthy than others, and the inner desire not to have to conform to some rules are all things that, to different degrees, we have all had to overcome. Another central theme proposed in the novel is the fact that intellectual vigor, or what poses as intellectual vigor, is unreliable, especially if it pushes you away from morality. The novel may seem from the surface to be anti-Nietzschean in its dealing with morality by placing it above reason. However, it is the loopholes in reason itself that the novel points to. In my understanding of the novel, morality is not placed above intellect. Rather, the novelist calls for an integration of morality in the process of rationalizing as an integral part without which conducting the right action will be jeopardized. That's to say, without which knowing what the right thing to do will be nearly impossible. All in all, this novel is worth every emotion and thought that will be consumed in its pages. Finally, for our honorable mentions, we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and The Bell Jar of Sylvia Plath. Finally, I would really love hearing your thoughts about my top 5 recommended books, and I would also love to know the top 5 books on your list. In the meantime, stay safe.